The border stretched endlessly and without mercy, covered by a thick layer of winter snow. A snowstorm had been raging for 2 days, cutting off the small ranch from the limited civilization that existed beyond the mountains. It was Christmas Eve, a fact that only deepened the profound loneliness of Abel, a young rancher who lived alone on his family's property. Untouched by a woman's hands, he was unprepared for what the howling wilderness would bring to his doorstep. When he discovered them stealing provisions from his storage shed under the pale, snow-filtered morning light, he should have reached for his rifle. But something in their movements, a silent, coordinated grace through the swirling snow, something in the defiant set of their identical shoulders, froze him where he stood. They were Chinese twins, and the words they would speak to him days later would shatter every wall he had built around his lonely heart. What he didn't know was that Mai and Lian weren't just hungry for food. And what they didn't know was that the virgin rancher watching them from the shadows would become the one thing more dangerous than any enemy they had ever faced. Abel had been alone for 8 months since his father died from a fever, leaving him the ranch and nothing else but a crushing silence. He woke each morning to the emptiness of the cabin, worked the land until his hands were raw and numb from the cold, and fell asleep to the sound of his own breathing against the howling wind. The isolation had become a second skin, comfortable in its predictability. No one came this far out, especially not in the dead of winter. No one bothered him until the morning he heard the faint sound of movement in his supply shed. He grabbed his rifle from beside the door, his heart pounding against his ribs. Hired thugs had been spotted 2 territories over, men who killed for less than a horse. His boots made no sound on the freshly fallen snow as he approached the weathered wooden structure. The door hung open, creaking rhythmically in the wind. Inside, he could see shadows moving between the sacks of grain and preserved goods. Abel raised the rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. Then a figure stepped into the weak light streaming through the doorway, and every thought in his head went silent. They were identical, so much so it took his breath away. Slender but strong, with black hair braided into 2 matching plaits that fell down their backs, dusted with snowflakes. Their skin was the color of pale tea, their features delicate but etched with a deep, weary hardship. They wore simple cotton trousers and tunics that had seen hard use, and they moved as one, a mirror image of quiet efficiency. 2 Chinese women, alone in a blizzard, stealing from his supplies with the calm focus of people who had done this many times before. Their eyes met his at the same moment. Dark, almond-shaped pools that held no fear, only calculation. They were measuring him, deciding if he was a threat. Their hands didn't move toward any visible weapon, but he could see the readiness in their bodies, the coiled tension of people who knew how to survive. Abel should have shouted, should have ordered them off his land, should have fired a warning shot, but the words caught in his throat. There was something in their faces, something raw and haunted that he recognized because he saw it in his own reflection every morning. One of them turned away from him deliberately and picked up a sack of dried meat. Not running, not asking permission, just taking what they needed as if he wasn't standing there with a rifle pointed at her back. His finger loosened on the trigger. Wait, the word came out rougher than he intended, his breath a cloud in the frigid air. They both froze, then slowly turned their heads to look at him over their shoulders in perfect synchrony, eyebrows raised in question or challenge. He couldn't tell which. Abel lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking, and he didn't know if it was from the cold, from fear, or something else entirely. You don't have to steal it, their eyes narrowed. They didn't trust him. He could see it in every line of their bodies, but they didn't leave either. They stood there holding the single sack of meat, waiting to see what he would do next, waiting to see if he was another white man with pretty words and ugly intentions. He took a step back, giving them space, giving them the option to run if they wanted. Take what you need. Just, don't come back. For a long moment, they stared at him. Then, without a word, they grabbed 2 more sacks each, slinging them over their shoulders with a strength that shouldn't have surprised him but did, and walked past him out of the shed. They were so close he could smell the cold air and a faint scent of jasmine on their skin. So close he could see the faint, identical scar above their right eyebrows. They did not express gratitude, did not glance back, but simply proceeded towards the forest edge where the wild terrain commenced, their gait long and purposeful. He observed until they vanished into the shadows among the cottonwood trees, his heart still throbbing, his mind filled with inquiries for which he had no responses. However, what Abel failed to perceive was that 50 paces into the woods, Mai and Lian halted. They placed the sacks on the ground and turned to gaze back at the ranch house, at the young man standing motionless by his storage shed. And for the first time in half a year, something stirred within them that was not sorrow or fury. It was inquisitiveness, and inquisitiveness, they understood, was perilous. 3 days elapsed before Abel encountered them again. 3 days of constantly checking behind him, of being startled by shadows, of lying awake pondering if they would return, wondering if he desired their return. The snowstorm had passed, leaving behind a world of immaculate, hushed white. He was mending a fence along the eastern pasture when he sensed it. That tingling sensation of being observed. His hands became still on the rough, ice-covered timber, splinters pressing into his palms. He did not turn around. Did not wish to startle them if it was indeed them. Did not wish to appear fearful if it was not. Slowly, he resumed his work, driving the wooden post into the hard, frozen ground with steady blows of the mallet. Each impact sent vibrations up his arms. Perspiration ran down his back despite the biting cold air. And throughout it all, he felt those eyes upon him. After an hour, he could no longer endure it. He turned. One of them was standing at the edge of the tree line, perhaps 30 paces away, not concealing herself, merely observing. The morning sun reflected off the snow, catching the gleam of her black hair, and even from this distance, he could discern the intensity in her gaze. She was not looking at him in the manner one looks at a threat. She was scrutinizing him like a conundrum she was attempting to solve. Their eyes met, and neither moved. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something Abel could not articulate. His mouth became dry. His pulse quickened in a way unrelated to the physical exertion. She tilted her head slightly, and the corner of her mouth curved upwards. Not quite a smile, more as if she had discovered something amusing. Then she turned and vanished back into the forest. Abel stood there, hammer hanging loosely in his grasp, his breathing more rapid than it should have been. What were they doing? Why return merely to observe? The question revolved in his mind like vultures over a carcass, eroding his concentration for the remainder of the day. The following morning, they were there again, this time closer, seated together on a fallen log just beyond his property boundary. Arms crossed, watching him work on the corral gate. They made no effort to hide, no pretense of secrecy, simply sat there as conspicuously as the sunrise. He attempted to disregard them, which lasted perhaps 10 minutes before his curiosity prevailed. He put down his tools and walked towards them, each step crunching in the snow, feeling as though it carried more weight than it ought to. They did not move, did not react, merely watched him approach with those dark, inscrutable eyes. He stopped at the property line, an invisible demarcation none of them had yet crossed. Up close, he could perceive details he had previously overlooked, the way their clothing was worn but impeccably clean, the slight calluses on their fingers, the way they carried themselves like coiled springs, ready to burst into action at any moment. Why do you keep returning? His voice emerged rougher than intended. One of them, the one who appeared to be the spokesperson, responded, her English accented but clear. You are not what we anticipated. What did you expect? Violence. Cruelty. The things white men typically offer. She stood, and the other rose with her in a single, fluid movement. They were not tall, but they carried themselves with a presence that made them appear larger. But you provided us with sustenance, you allowed us to depart. Why? Abel swallowed with difficulty. The inquiry felt like a snare, yet he responded truthfully. It appeared you required it more than I did. Their expressions underwent a change, not precisely softening, but the harshness seemed to diminish slightly. You reside alone, the first individual stated. It was not a query, but he affirmed it nonetheless. So do we, she uttered, and it sounded like an admission, like acknowledging a vulnerability she was unaccustomed to recognizing. The quiet extended between them, yet it was not uncomfortable. It was laden with matters none of them knew how to articulate. Abel could again detect the scent of jasmine on them, mingled with the cold pine aroma of the forest. He could observe the rise and fall of their chests as they respired, their breath forming mist in the atmosphere. My designation is Abel. They scrutinized him for another prolonged moment. Then the speaker declared, this is my sibling, Leanne. The names settled between them like stones dropped into tranquil water, with ripples extending outwards. My turn to depart, but this time she glanced back at him before they vanished into the arboreal expanse. And in that look, Abel perceived something that caused his abdomen to constrict with a blend of apprehension and expectation. They would return tomorrow, and he would be unable to cease contemplating them until their arrival. They reappeared the following day at midday, when the sun was at its zenith and the shadows were at their shortest. However, on this occasion, they did not remain at the tree line. This time they traversed directly across his property, past the enclosure, past the storage shed, right up to where he was seated on the porch steps, attempting to warm himself in the faint winter sunlight while consuming a portion of dried meat and stale bread. Abel froze, the bread halfway to his oral cavity. His cardiac organ pounded so intensely he believed they might perceive it. Mai and Leanne halted approximately 3 feet away, sufficiently close that he had to incline his cranium backward to observe them, sufficiently close that he could discern the specks of gold in their dark ocular organs. "You are apprehensive of us," Mai articulated. Not a query, but an observation. "I am not." He paused. Deception appeared futile. Perhaps a little. Good apprehension preserves existence. She took a seat beside him on the step. Leanne remained standing a few feet distant, a silent protector. Mai was sufficiently close that her shoulder nearly made contact with his. The proximity caused his integument to tingle with heightened awareness. "But that is not the reason your hands tremble when we are near." Heat suffused his facial region. He placed the bread down, suddenly devoid of appetite. "I do not comprehend your meaning." "Indeed, you do." She turned to fully face him, and the directness in her gaze dismantled every defense he might have attempted to construct. "You observe us in the manner a famished individual observes sustenance, in the manner a person in the desert observes hydration." Abel's pharynx constricted. He desired to refute it, desired to rise and depart, desired to perform any action other than remain seated under the intensity of her focus, but his corporeal form would not comply. Mai inclined closer, her breath warm against his cheek. "We have not engaged in intimacy for 6 months, she whispered, the words a gentle warmth against the frigid air. "Not since our progenitor passed away. Do you comprehend what 6 months of yearning feels like, Abel?" The world narrowed to just the two of them and Leanne, a vigilant shadow, just the warmth of Mai's body adjacent to his, just the low rasp of her voice uttering words that ignited every nerve he possessed. His voice fractured. He cleared his throat and attempted again. "I would not be aware." She withdrew slightly, scrutinizing his countenance. Something akin to comprehension dawned in her ocular organs. Then something else, something that might have been craving. "You have never been with a female." It was not a query, but shame nevertheless consumed him. At the age of 24, he ought to have accomplished numerous things. But living out here alone, with no town for miles, no neighbors, no one but him and the land and the silence. "No," he admitted, the word barely a whisper. Mai's hand came up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it might have been imagined. Except his skin burned everywhere she touched. "That is not something to be ashamed of." "Then why do I feel like it is?" "Because you think it makes you less." Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, and his breath caught. "But maybe it makes you more." Before he could ask what she meant, before he could process the feeling of her hand on his skin, she and Leanne stood abruptly, their whole bodies going taut, heads turning toward the eastern trees. Abel saw then what they had heard before him, movement in the forest. Not one person, but several. "They are looking for us," Mai said, her voice gone flat and cold. The woman who had been touching his face was gone, replaced by the survivor he had first seen in his supply shed. Her hand went to the small knife at her belt, and Leanne's hand did the same. "Who?" "The men we ran from. We have been gone too long." She looked down at him, and for the first time, he saw something like regret in her eyes. "They will not understand why we are here." They will not understand you. 3 rough-looking men emerged from the tree line. White men armed with pistols and rifles, their faces hard with suspicion. They saw Mai and Lian standing over him, saw him sitting at their feet. The lead man's eyes narrowed, and he barked something that Abel didn't understand but felt in his gut like a punch. Mai answered in flawless, cold English, her voice sharp and defiant. The man took a step forward, his hand tightening on his pistol. The other 2 fanned out, surrounding them. Abel stood slowly, his hands visible and empty. His mind raced through options, none of them good. These men could kill him without breaking a sweat, could burn his ranch and ride away before anyone knew what happened. And the sisters, standing between him and them, looked like they were weighing whether to fight or run. The lead man spoke again, and this time Mai's shoulders tensed. Whatever he said, it wasn't a request. It was a command. She turned to look at Abel one last time. In that look was everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building between them over these few short days, and something else, something that looked like a promise. Then she and Lian walked toward the men, and Abel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to stop them, even though he knew it would mean his death. 2 nights later, Abel woke to the sound of something hitting his window. A pebble, then another. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the glass, heart pounding. In the moonlight, he saw them. Mai and Lian stood in his yard, their dark forms stark against the snow. Mai's face was bruised along one cheekbone. Lian had a cut on her arm. They were breathing hard. Mai gestured urgently toward the house. He didn't think, just ran downstairs and threw open the door. They pushed past him, scanning the darkness behind them. "They are coming," Mai whispered, "not far behind." "What happened?" "We refused to go back. Said we would choose our own path." She touched the bruise on her face without flinching. "Mr. Chen's enforcer did this. Said we dishonored our agreement. Dishonored our dead father's memory." Abel heard it then, voices in the distance. The men were tracking them. The cellar. Under the kitchen he grabbed Mai's arm, pulling them toward the small door in the floor. "It's hidden under the rug." They paused, their eyes meeting his. In their eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen before: vulnerability. Trust. They nodded and allowed him to lead them down into the darkness. The space was cramped, barely tall enough to stand in, filled with preserved goods and supplies for winter. Abel climbed down after them and closed the door above them, replacing the rug. Darkness enveloped them completely. He could hear their breathing, rapid and shallow, and feel the warmth of their bodies in the confined space. They were standing very close, forming a triangle of warmth and fear. "They will search the house," Lian whispered, her first words to him, her voice a soft murmur against his neck. "Then we stay quiet." Footsteps sounded above, heavy boots crossing his floor. Abel's hand found Mai's in the dark, and she squeezed it hard enough to cause pain. Lian's hand pressed against his chest, and he knew she could feel his heart pounding against her palm. Voices from above, angry, searching. The sound of furniture being moved, glass breaking. They were destroying his house. Mai's fingers curled into his shirt, her body tense against his. In the complete darkness, every other sense was heightened. The jasmine scent of their hair, the warmth of their skin, the way Mai's breath caught when his thumb unintentionally moved across her knuckles. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The men moved through every room, coming close to the kitchen twice. Abel held his breath each time, feeling the sisters do the same. Their bodies pressed closer in the confined space. And even with the danger above them, even with death so near, he was acutely aware of every point where they touched. Finally, the footsteps receded. Voices faded. Silence settled like dust, but none of them moved. Mai's forehead rested against his collarbone now, her breathing steadier but still rapid. His free hand had somehow found her waist, fingers spread against the cotton of her tunic. "Abel," her voice was barely audible. "What you said before. About never being with a woman. Not the best time for that conversation. There may not be another time." She lifted her head, and even in the darkness, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. They will not stop looking for us. If they find us with you, they will kill all of us. Then why did you come here? The answer came not in words, but in action. Her lips found his in the darkness, and every thought in his head scattered like leaves in the wind. She kissed him with a hunger that took his breath away, her hands moving to his face, his neck, his shoulders. He responded instinctively, pulling her closer, tasting desperation and desire on her lips. When she pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. "That is why," she said. "Because in 6 months of grief and rage and loneliness, you are the only thing that has made us feel alive again." "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted, his voice rough. "Neither do we anymore," her fingers traced his jaw in the darkness. "But we know we cannot go back. And we know we cannot stop thinking about you." Above them, the house was silent. The men were gone, but none of them moved to leave the cellar. Not yet. Because in this small, dark space, pressed together with danger all around, something had shifted between them that could not be undone. Maya and Leanne stayed. For 3 days, they remained snowed in, and Abel's quiet world became something else entirely. Something charged and alive and terrifying in its intensity. They worked alongside him without being asked, helping him repair the damage the men had done. They hauled water from the well, moving with an efficiency that spoke of hard-earned survival skills. And with each passing moment they spent together, the atmosphere between them grew heavier with unspoken sentiments. On the second morning, they were in the barn attending to his 2 horses. Abel reached for a bridle at the same instant Mai did, and their hands made contact. Both froze in place. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds before they withdrew, but his skin burned where her fingers had grazed his. "Apologies," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Do not apologize for touching me." Her voice carried a sharpness that made him look up. She was observing him with that direct stare that stripped away all pretense, with Leanne a silent reflection beside her. "Unless you do not wish to." "That's not the case." He paused, unsure how to complete his thought. Mai moved closer, near enough that he could discern the pulse throbbing at her throat. "You are apprehensive of desiring me. Of desiring us." "Why?" "Because I do not comprehend how to desire someone in this manner." The confession emerged raw and sincere. "Everything I know about you indicates you are perilous, that I should dismiss you. But every time I attempt to contemplate your departure, I cannot breathe properly." Something softened in her expression. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "You believe we are not fearful? We are terrified. 6 months prior, we interred our father. Swore we would never allow anyone close again. And then you appear with your tender hands and even tenderer heart, and we cannot restrain ourselves from desiring things we have no right to desire." "What things?" Instead of responding, she kissed him, more slowly this time than in the cellar. Less desperate, more intentional, learning the contour of his mouth, his taste. His hands found her waist, drawing her nearer, and she emitted a low sound in her throat that sent warmth throughout his entire body. When they separated, both breathing heavily, she rested her forehead against his. "That. We desire that. Desire to experience something other than sorrow. Desire to recall what it is to be touched with tenderness instead of as an object. And I desire." He trailed off, suddenly bashful despite having just kissed her. "Articulate it." "I desire to know what it feels like to be with someone. To no longer be solitary." His hands tightened on her waist. "But more than that, I desire it to be you. Not just anyone. You 2-inch." Mai pulled back sufficiently to observe him fully. "You make it exceedingly difficult to maintain our defenses, Abel." "Good," he surprised himself with the utterance, with the conviction behind it. "Because you have already dismantled all of mine." That evening, they sat by the fire as the wind howled outside. Abel was positioned in the middle, Mai's shoulder touching his on one side, Leanne's on the other, their hands intertwined. None spoke extensively. They had no need to. The silence was comfortable, filled with the crackling of the fire and the whistling of the wind. "Tell me about him," Abel said finally. The individual you fled from. Mai remained silent for a prolonged moment. His name is Mr. Chen. He held my father's financial obligations. When our father passed away, he claimed us as recompense. Intended to sell us as wives to his business associates. As if we were possessions to be transferred. You are not property, Abel stated, his voice fierce. No, Lian spoke, her voice quiet but resolute. We are not. She turned to gaze at him. That is precisely why we will not return even if it means being pursued. She paused, her head turning sharply towards the window. Mai and Abel also noticed it. A slender beam of light bobbing through the snow-filled darkness. Not a single torch, but several. They have brought more men, Mai stated, her voice devoid of emotion. They are no longer searching. They are coming to seize us by force. Abel stood up, his heart sinking. How many? Too many. She and Lian rose beside him, their hands reaching for the knives at their belts. They will not depart without us. And if you obstruct their path, they will kill you without hesitation. The torches were drawing nearer, a line of fire cutting through the deepening darkness, heading directly for his ranch, coming for them. And Abel understood that in the next few minutes, he would have to make a decision that would forever alter the course of his life. 7 men emerged from the darkness, torches casting harsh shadows across their faces. The leader, the same man from before, stepped forward. His gaze found Mai and Lian, then shifted to Abel with undisguised contempt. He spat on the snow-covered ground. The girls are coming with us. Chen is weary of waiting. Mai responded, stepping in front of Abel, with Lian positioned at her side. We are not going anywhere. The man laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. That is not your decision to make, sweetheart. You belong to Mr. Chen. You dishonored your father's debt by fleeing. You return now, or we will burn this place to the ground with this farm boy inside. He gestured with his torch. Chen has other buyers awaiting. This is not negotiable. Abel looked at the 7 armed men, looked at the torches, looked at the 2 women standing rigidly beside him, caught between 2 worlds. Every instinct he possessed screamed that he should retreat, let them go, save himself. He was merely one man against 7 hired gunmen. He had no chance. But when he opened his mouth, different words emerged. No. The single syllable pierced the night. The men shifted, their hands moving to their pistols. Mai and Lian turned to look at him, their eyes wide with something that might have been fear or hope or both. Abel, you cannot, Mai began. I said, no. He stepped forward, positioning himself between them and the men. His hands were trembling, but his voice was steady. They remain here. Because they wish to. Not because I am compelling them. Not because you are compelling them. Because they chose to. The lead man's expression darkened. You are a fool. One man cannot stand against us. Your death will be meaningless. Perhaps, Abel's heart was pounding so intensely he thought it might rupture. But if dying means they get to choose their own lives, then I will die. Because that is what honorable men do. They advocate for people who cannot advocate for themselves. Even when they are terrified, even when they know they will lose. Mai made a sound behind him, something between a gasp and a sob. Her hand tightened on his shirt, and Lian's found his other arm. The lead man observed Abel for a prolonged moment. Then he almost smiled. Why? Why would you sacrifice your life for 2 runaways who are not your own? Abel did not hesitate. They belong to me, and I belong to them. We chose each other. When he uttered those words, a change occurred in the men's postures. The leader's gaze moved between Abel and the sisters, observing something that caused him to pause. He was a hired enforcer, not a fanatic. He was compensated to retrieve property, not to perish in a futile gunfight over a principle. He assessed the determined expression on Abel's face, the lethal stillness of the 2 women behind him, and the single rifle in Abel's hands. He spat again. They are not worth the ammunition. Chen can find other girls. He turned away. Let us depart. The other men followed, their torches vanishing back into the forest. Before the leader completely disappeared, he glanced back one last time, not at the sisters, but at Abel. And in that look was something that could have been respect. They remained in the yard long after the torches disappeared, still in their defensive formation, neither speaking. The gravity of what had just transpired weighed heavily upon them. They had chosen exile, had chosen him over the known evil. "You did not have to do that," Mai said finally, her voice hoarse. "Stand in front of us in that manner. You could have died." "I know." "Then why?" Lian asked, her voice soft. Abel turned to face them fully. In the moonlight, he could see tears streaming down their cheeks, the first time he had witnessed them cry. "Because 6 months ago, I buried my father and believed I would spend the remainder of my life alone. Thought that was simply what my life would be. Empty, quiet, safe." He reached up and wiped away one of Mai's tears with his thumb, then one of Lian's. "And then you two appeared and made me experience emotions I did not know I could feel. Made me desire things I did not know how to desire. And I realized that safety is not living. It is merely existing." Mai closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, and Lian mirrored the gesture. "We have sacrificed everything for this. For you. I know. And I will spend every day ensuring you never regret it." Mai opened her eyes, and the vulnerability he perceived there left him breathless. These strong, fierce women who had confronted armed men were looking at him as if he were the only stable element in a world that had just shifted beneath their feet. "Take me inside," she whispered. His heart pounded hard against his ribs. "Abel, I need to feel something genuine, something good. I need—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I need you." They barely made it through the door before she was kissing him, her hands in his hair, her body pressed against his with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. He responded instinctively, backing her toward the stairs, stumbling over his own feet in his haste. Lian followed silently, closing and barring the door, a guardian to the last. "Slow down," Mai murmured against his mouth, even as her hands tugged at his shirt. "We have time now. All the time we require." They reached his bedroom, and suddenly the urgency transformed into something else. Something tender. Mai's hand slowed as she unbuttoned his shirt, her fingers tracing the contours of his chest with a gentleness that made him shiver. He touched her in return, fumbling with the ties of her tunic, clumsy but careful. "I do not know what I am doing," he admitted, his voice trembling. "Neither do I." She cupped his face in her hands, compelling him to meet her eyes. "The men our father would have selected for us, it would have been a matter of duty. With Mr. Chen, it was about possession. I don't know how to approach this slowly, how to make it signify something beyond just physical intimacy. Then we'll figure it out together." What followed was clumsy and hesitant, yet perfectly flawed in its imperfection. Mai guided him with gentle hands, showing him where to touch, how to move. He learned the contours of her body in the darkness, every mark, curve, and sensitive spot. She gasped when he kissed the hollow of her throat, arched into him when his hands found her hips. When they finally united, she made a sound that was half sob, half moan. And he understood this wasn't merely physical release. This was two individuals who had been solitary for too long, discovering belonging, finding solace, finding peace. Afterward, they lay intertwined, skin damp with perspiration, breathing heavily. Mai's head rested on his chest, his hand moving slowly up and down her spine. Lian sat in a chair by the window, a silent silhouette against the moonlight, watching over them. 6 months, Mai said finally, her voice quiet. For 6 months, we thought we would never feel secure again. Thought we would carry sorrow and rage until they consumed us. And then you appeared with your tender heart and your impossible bravery, and everything changed. Abel pressed a kiss to her hair. I was so scared. I know. We could feel you trembling. She lifted her head to look at him, and in her eyes was something warm and gentle that he had never witnessed before. But you did it anyway. That is what courage is. Not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. My father used to say that. He was a wise man. She settled back against his chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his skin. What happens now, Abel? We cannot return. Those men will not pursue us again. But we are alone in this world, except for you. Then we build something new. Together he tightened his arms around her. Stay here. Help me manage this ranch. We'll make it work somehow. You make it sound easy. Maybe it is. Maybe we've all been complicating it more than necessary by trying to do everything alone. He felt her smile against his chest. Besides, I need someone who actually knows how to repair a fence properly. I've been doing it incorrectly for months. Her laugh was soft and genuine, and he realized it was the first time he had truly heard her laugh. From the chair, he heard Leanne let out a small, soft sound of amusement. The sounds of it filled something inside him he hadn't known was empty. 3 months passed, and the harsh winter gave way to a vibrant spring. The ranch that had been Abel's solitary confinement became something entirely different, a home, a life, a future he had never dared to envision. Maya and Leanne moved through the property with the assurance of people who belonged there. Leanne, with her quiet patience, had calmed the mare that had been nervous since his father died. Mai, with her sharp intellect, had expanded the garden, planting herbs and vegetables. Together, they transformed the empty spare room into a workspace where they crafted goods they could trade at the distant settlement. Abel watched them one morning from the porch, a coffee cup warm in his hands. They were in the corral with the horses, their movements a fluid, synchronized dance of certainty and skill. They were different now. He was different now. He could feel it in the way he carried himself, the way he no longer flinched at his own shadow, the way he could look at his reflection and see someone who had chosen courage over safety, who had stood up to armed men, who had learned what it meant to truly be with another person, body and soul. Mai looked up and caught him watching, her mouth curved in that small smile that still made his heart skip a beat. She and Leanne walked over, climbing the porch steps and settling beside him on the bench he had built, one on each side. Their shoulders pressed against his uncomfortable familiarity. You are staring again, Mai said, taking his coffee and stealing a sip. Can't help it, I still can't believe you're real. We are very real, Leanne said, a small smile gracing her lips. She handed the cup back, her fingers lingering on his. And we are not going anywhere. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. In the distance, birds called to each other. The horses moved peacefully in the corral. Everything was still and right in a way it had never been before. Do you regret it? Abel asked quietly. Giving up everything. Mai was silent for a moment. We gave up a life where we had no voice, no choice, where we would have been passed from one man to another like a possession. She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and certain. What we found here is worth more than everything we left behind. We found freedom. We found partnership. We found a man who sees us as equals, not a burden or a prize. I found the same thing, he said, setting down the coffee cup and taking both their hands in his. You saved me, you know. I was just existing, waiting for life to happen to me. And then you crashed into my world and made me realize that life only happens if you're brave enough to reach for it. Mai leaned her head against his shoulder. Leanne did the same on the other side. We saved each other, they said in unison. A month later, they stood together in the evening light, surveying the ranch that had grown under their combined efforts. The fences were strong, the garden thrived, the horses were healthy and well-trained. They had built something real, something that would last. Abel pulled them close, and they came willingly, fitting against him like they had always belonged there. My father used to tell me that a man's wealth isn't measured in gold or land, he said. It's measured in the moments that take his breath away. He kissed Mai, then Leanne. And I'm the richest man alive, they laughed, the sound warm and full, and kissed him back as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire. In those kisses was everything they had been through, all the fear and courage and choice and consequence, all the loneliness that had been transformed into connection. They had all been broken in different ways, all been alone, all been trapped by circumstances they couldn't control. But together, they had built something none of them could have created alone, a life chosen freely, a love earned through vulnerability and trust. And in the end, that was worth more than any kingdom any of them had left behind.